The work we are seeing here is some preparatory work for a body mechanics shot. We're going to see what works well and what works less well in this preparatory work. The idea being that we will go into a 3D software only once we know the shot very well. This way we will limit the chances of wasting time in 3D. And the body mechanics shot is made in 3D animation, of course, and we have some thumbnails and then we have live action footage that we can review. First of all, thank you very much, Simone, for sending the material over. Let's have a look at it. The more preparatory work you do in general, the better it is for your process as a 3D animator, because you will waste less time in 3D trying to pose the character and you will know very well your shot. The more you have to improvise in your shot, the most difficult the animation will become to do. I am having a look at the live action reference. The live action reference is actually quite fun. The first part is especially strong in my opinion. It has a lot of details that you wouldn't normally think about until you start to actually see people performing that action. The part I am less convinced by, and I think it's probably the less strong part of the story, is the fall down. It's not clear to me why the character is falling down, and it seems almost like the falling down is unrelated to the main story. It feels like you're just falling down because you're not paying attention, while I would have expected the story to incorporate the fact that this burden is quite heavy, and it's this very burden that creates a problem for the character. Otherwise, it feels like it's just a pure coincidence that the character is falling down. How does this event that we have in the end relate to the struggle at the beginning? And the answer right now is they don't relate to one another, apart from the fact that they have in common the fact that there is a burden right there on the head of the character. And while the reference is quite good, I think you would want to look into the second part and try to understand why the character falls down, because right now it doesn't seem there is a very clear explanation for this. I would have imagined, for instance, that after the initial struggle, which is really good to see in here, to manage the weight, you could maybe wave even a bit more with the top of the spine, for instance. It would be maybe good if you had the walk back in here and then you would have some run forward with the weight risking to fall down forward there. Maybe the spine goes forward, the weight risks to fall forward there, and then you could finally settle down to a pose in which you have managed to gain control of the weight. And the pose could well be something like the one you have in here right now, in which you finally have the weight in a static pose under control. And maybe what could trigger the fact that you fall down is the fact that you want to lift it up on top of your head. Because it is so difficult to lift this weight, what could make your character fall down is the weight itself as you try to place it on top of your head. I mean, you clearly struggled until now to balance that weight. This additional endeavor that you're trying to embark into is what makes it fall, or could be what makes the weight fall to the ground. So in my opinion, you just have to tie the fact that the character falls down a bit better with the rest of the story. The initial part at the beginning is actually quite cool. I think I remember that your character was a female in your original planning. This does not transpire, particularly from your thumbnails or from your reference. I think if you wanted to have a female, it would be great if the pump was pushed down with both straight arms, making use of the weight of the body, because being a female would mean being a bit less physically strong in this case. It would be a lot more appealing if you had a bit less controlled push down. Right now it feels like most of the action is done by the strength of your arms and it feels rather in control. But I feel that if you started with the idea that the girl was unable to even push down this thing, then when the girl were to lift up the weight, it would make more sense for the weight to be more difficult to handle, because we introduced a character that is already struggling with just the lever. So the weight would increase that complexity, and the fact that the girl struggled earlier on would make it more believable now that the girl will struggle while lifting the weight. So this is something worth considering in my opinion. Let me check. We lift it up, we fall to the back. Yes, as I said, you can stabilize in here, and then when you lift here, you might have a moment of peace and stability, but then I think it would be cool if you started swaying one way with the weight on the head or another as you try to control that weight and then you fail for this reason as you try to control that weight. Or the other way would be maybe if you use weight at the beginning while you're trying to control the weight at the very beginning, and then you fall down, you lose control when you lift it up. But you have to think of what makes this character fall down. I mean, the most classic situation is usually something on the floor. The character puts their feet on a bar of soap, for instance. It's not the case in here. What is this water for instance? And where are we in this scenario? Is this one of those lavatories type scenarios where women used to wash clothes back then? What is it that we are really looking at in terms of scene? What is this water for? Trying to understand what is that water for will give you an idea of why the character falls down, because right now there is a bit of a lack of connection there. So in general, the references work quite well. They would work better if starting from the beginning you already introduced a character whose physical power was less than optimal, let's say that way, so that when the character lifts up the weight, it's not really that surprising to us that it struggles. So that would be really useful for the purpose of your story. There's a great sense of weight in here. And I think in here you've got to decide whether you want to play with the characters weighing its body as they try to counterbalance the weight, or if you want to do it later. At any stage, you have to connect, in my opinion, the falling down with the weight itself. Right now, that connection is missing, and it will become less appealing as a shot if you just have a character walking around and finding an obstacle. Another way you could introduce an obstacle could be maybe if the weight was on a step, for instance, you use the step itself as a way to keep the weight a bit higher, and then you just trip over that step. Or it could be over some sort of support, like some sort of stool support, so that it makes it easier to fill it up and lift, but that stool support is also the same thing that makes you trip over. You have to understand what this scene is about. Maybe it will not be so important as far as rendering is concerned. Maybe you're not even going to add a set in there, and you're just going to keep the animation. But if you knew what the water is about, what the water is for, then you would know a bit better possible ways for this character to trip over. These thumbnails are a good way to start the study, but then it's not very clear again. The sense of struggle, it's not really visible in this thumbnail, and how the character falls down is also not visible, and we don't know where the bucket goes in the last drawings. I mean, is it here? Is it behind the body? Is it on the head of the character, where you would expect it to be? Probably. The second part of the animation is really a bit mysterious right now. If this were my shot, I wouldn't feel like investing my time in 3D just yet, knowing that I don't know very well why the character falls down. I think the thumbnails are sharing the same issue with the references, in which you don't quite know why we fall down. We know we have to fall down because it's written in the script, but we don't quite know why. So if this were my shot, I would prefer to start animation knowing a bit better that second part of the animation, and I would try to figure out which kind of scenario we're in, what is that water for, what's on the floor, where are we, and then you don't have to put it all in the 3D scene, but figuring it out will make you aware of possible solutions, will give you ideas, and that's all you need right now. Because right now, the character is falling without any apparent reason. It's not falling because the weight is heavy. Yeah, you could say it's falling because there's a tripping hazard in there, but at the same time, why didn't the character notice the tripping hazard? Is that because the character is super happy that they managed to manage the weight, in which case they're too self-absorbed to even notice the hazard? And if that's the case, how are you going to tell that thing through the references? Because right now it's not there. So decide what's the cause for the tripping, because that's the less strong part of this animation. And I hope you found this useful, and I can't wait to see the next iteration. Have fun!
Very good for blood circulation, heart problem, hormone problem.